Hello and welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Welcome everybody to our latest episode where I sit down with Amy Smith, who's the acting chief of the City of Seattle's new CARE team. CARE stands for Community Assisted Response and Engagement. It's Seattle's new third public safety department that sits alongside police and fire. The CARE team was launched in October of this year by Mayor Harrell and is focused first in the downtown area. This has been a long discussed and debated new public safety department that is now operational and has a leader, an acting chief in Amy Smith, who holds advanced degrees in ethical leadership, administration, and organizational learning, and most recently completed a doctorate at Vanderbilt University. She's worked in the nonprofit sector in Washington, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Idaho, and is now leading the launch and implementation of the city's third public safety department, which is designed to respond to those 911 calls that may not require a commissioned law enforcement officer with a gun or a fire truck to show up. And we all have our own experiences of seeing somebody in need, a person down that may need a welfare check, somebody laying on the sidewalk, somebody dealing with a behavioral health issue, and you sort of don't know who to call in those circumstances. Now you call 911 and Amy's team will respond. Amy is leading this work piloted in the downtown area, focused in the core of downtown. And we discuss why this department came to be, how it's designed to work, how she's going to measure success, and some of the other cities that are further along than Seattle in developing and implementing these types of responses and departments, and some lessons that we can learn from those places. Hope you enjoy my conversation with Amy Smith, the acting chief of the City of Seattle's new CARE department. All right, Amy, we're just jump in here.
All right. Hi.
Good with you?
Yeah. Yeah, always.
Thanks for making time for this.
You bet.
So why don't we just start with, for those who don't know, what is CARE?
So CARE is the third public safety department in the city of Seattle now. It stands for Community Assisted Response and Engagement. So it houses 911. It houses diversified response, so we'll have lots of different kinds of responders we can send out besides police and fire. And then coming this year, it will house the Office of Violence Prevention that the mayor has referenced a few times. The city actually hasn't had that yet. We have those functions scattered around, but not centralized and not coordinated.
And this has been talked about for quite some time in Seattle.
I've heard that.
And,
yes.
and other places.
Yes. Yeah.
What's been the activity over the last 6 months to really stand this up and get it now functioning in the downtown?
Yeah. So when it comes to alternative response to 911 calls, I know there's been a desire for that for a long time. A lot of people reference the CAHOOTS program, which started in Eugene in 1989, which just suggested we've got a lot of 911 calls. Some of these probably don't have anything to do with police or fire. There's a strong nonprofit community there. And so it really was about coordinating that nonprofit intervention effort with the public sector. And this, went on for years and years and years, and nobody really paid attention. And then people started to pay attention actually with this Transform 911 research that it spun up out of the University of Chicago Health Lab. Dr. Rebecca Neustetter is an academic who started to really look at what are the calls that are coming in nationally. It's fascinating to me how, 911 fundamentally is like a data hub, right? I mean, there would be so much information there about how things are going.
And you had a stat you mentioned the other day when you spoke at the board meeting of the Downtown Seattle Association for Seattle, where you
you
referenced the total number of calls on an annual basis.
Yeah, nearly 900,000 this year.
And the number that are appropriate for law enforcement, the number that are appropriate for fire EMS, and then the big number in the middle that...
Right. Well, high level, it looks like about half don't have anything to do with fire or police. I mean, if you look at the core work, the functions, or medical transport, it's all sorts of different things. Further complex is that about... I've heard 30%, 33% of the calls that come into the non-emergency line, they really should have gone to 911. And then vice versa. There are many calls that come into 911 that really are not emergency. They're not high acuity is how we say it, not a big threat to safety, but just other concerns. And so I like to use a turn of phrase that my friend Ryan Smith, who runs Durham Heart, that program, he says, Amy, it's just a simple sorting problem. That, a call comes in and I've got 3 buckets here. I've got, again, medical transport. I got a gun and a badge over here. I got fire over here. But most of us have hundreds and hundreds of call types. And so if you just look very simplistically at the problem, this is the narrative in this call. Who would I send? If I could send any kind of professional or team of professionals, who would it be? And it's actually so simple to look at it that way, to just start over and look at the data, start to sort. It's not so much in the press right now. There's a lot of interest about call types, meaning what did the 911 call taker hear and sort of infer, and then who did they dispatch? What's really interesting is if you look at how the call was cleared, meaning how it got resolved, what did it turn out to be? Because if you think about it, somebody's observing a thing and they're guessing. And so there's just a ton of nuance in that. My new team is going to go out to person down calls. That's what they're doing primarily. That can be anything. I mean, that can be somebody asleep on a park bench. That can be overdose, right? And I don't intend to send them to overdose. We're trying to make sure we have protocols that say, no, that goes right to fire. That will be Health 1, Health 99 now. We have that response. But it's going to be imperfect, because you're relying on a human being making an observation who may or may not be very informed on these topics.
Who's doing this well? You mentioned Durham, you mentioned Eugene, Denver's been referenced before.
Yeah.
Is there a gold standard, Albuquerque, I think, as well, right?
Yeah,
Is there a gold standard that you're keeping your eyes on as you build this out here in Seattle?
Yeah, there's two. So again, I have an academic background and bent. And so when I arrived, the first thing I did was just look at the research. I'm still in kind of in the doctoral world. So I just actually went right back to my alma mater, into the libraries, and looked at the research, what's being published actively, the doctoral work that's being done, and started to cold call academics who had been in the space and just gut check what I was seeing. There are about 75 pilots that are similar, that are, again, alternatives to policing, meaning not co-response. That's a different thing when you've got people in the same car, but alternatives. And then, asking people, are there emerging trends? Is there anything that we know? Lots of different questions. What types of responders are best? Does somebody need certain letters after their name? Does that correlate with more effective work in the field or not? That was one question I had. Is it better to be totally independent of fire and police? Is it better to be coordinated? I had all these questions.
You're not riding around in police cars.
In the same vehicle. Yeah, that's a co-responder model. And again, I'm always quick to say we need co-response. We need it badly. Police have had co-response here. They started to pilot that in 2010. It's great. I mean, it's across the board. It can be very, very useful. Health 1 is a co-response model as well. And a lot of people say what I'm doing, it is still a version of co-response.
You end up at the same scene. You just get there.
Right.
Different ways.
Different cars, exactly. But what I learned really quickly, lots of smart people, again, it was almost like quasi-scientific the way I did it, just asking the same questions in the same way of lots of different kinds of people. And what I learned quickly is there's no blueprint, and we don't know. And anybody who says they know, don't trust them because there's no evidence. Right now, we're starting to see leading indicators. One, that it's just useful. So you see morale improve when this is going well. You see morale improve across public safety departments. We see...
So the cops and the firefighters and other
people
first
feel
responders.
like, oh, good, there's somebody's helping us. Mental health crisis is everywhere. Substance use disorder is profound right now. Fentanyl is profound, and it's discouraging. Anybody who's going out responding to 911 calls is discouraged because we're limited in our ability to act. I learned that Albuquerque really had scaled the best. It was fast, but also responsible. So they just wrapped up their third year. They have 105 of my type of, care crisis responders in the field right now. I think Mariella said they're hiring another 38 this year or something like that. So the department will grow to be over 150. They do not have 911. So we're completely unique nationally.
Meaning they're not responding to calls that come through 911?
Meaning they have a third public safety department, Albuquerque Community Safety, but it is only like the care crisis responders and violence prevention. It's this space. They do not house 911. So Seattle is unique. Nobody's done that I'm aware. And I get teased because it makes my job much more difficult in a way, because that is a big, rather complex business, managing and especially navigating transformation in 911. And then all this other stuff as well. So people tease me and give me snacks and, say good luck and stay with it. But I think it's a significant advantage because I'm right at the heart of the data. And so if that's what you're trying to solve for, what is the best first response? I have a line of sight into it that is very unique. Further, I can compel people to act in 911.
And you sit at the 911 center, right?
Yeah, I do.
That's where your office is, right around the corner.
That's one of them. Yes, one of them. I'm hard to find, but that is one of them. Yeah, that's where I prefer to be. That still feels to me like this is the core business in public safety in this city. So, and it's just a cool place. These are some of my most favorite teammates I've ever had. They tend to be very funny. I think that's one of the coping mechanisms you develop if you're in
on that end of the line.
Yeah.
So what does one of these calls look like? Like, can you take us through either one that's occurred or sort of how it would work?
Yeah.
There's a person down at 3rd and Union.
Yes,
someone
there is right now.
Yeah, there probably
yes,
is right now, right? With
fair.
the struggles that we have at that block. So someone calls
yes
911.
Yeah.
Then what?
So right when somebody calls, first we figure out, should this go to fire? Does the person know that there's emergency medical assistance needed or there is a fire or something like that? If it's, again, not that, then the question is, does this need to go to police? And historically, it would go to police, and then police would invoke a secondary response. So it could be a community service officer. It could be the mobile crisis team that King County has had. There are a number of resources that police could invoke. Now we have a protocol that says if it's determined that it is priority 3, that means less urgent. That means somebody needs help. We should send a response, but this is not priority 1 or 2. This is not like lights and sirens, off you go. If it's a person 3 down and the care team is available, they are 11 a.m. until 11 p.m. currently. Then we dispatch and they'll call. I'm always listening on the radio. It's Care 31 usually is like the name of the unit, the car. And so they'll say, are you available to go? They'll describe the narrative, and we're on police channels. So police at the same time are hearing the call. And so they sort of assign their unit, we assign our unit, and then they respond.
And you meet together on scene.
Yeah, on scene. Yeah. So the officer basically right now is clearing the call. And people, I've been questioned about this. In fact, actually, this made me laugh. Somebody had suggested in the press that I was being gate kept by the police, right? That's what it looked like, that police were still in charge of this work. And they teased me.
Because you can't show up until they show up.
Yeah, but the police teased me. They were like, she's gatekeeping us if anything, because folks who work with me and know me know I'm not,
But some would assume that the requirement to have an officer come along and meet you there, given the shortage of officers in the city, would be a limiting factor in your ability to respond to these calls. How isn't it if so many of our officers are focused on priority 1 calls, shots fired, homicides, assaults, things like that, and not priority 2 and 3?
Well, it is unfortunate, but the problem is it's really violent downtown right now. And some of the side effects of fentanyl are violent. And so that is the simple reason why. And in the end,
so they're in the area, is what you're saying?
Everyone's downtown, but also I don't want to run any risk at all. People are already fearful. The idea conceptually of having, social workers or mental health professionals going out responding to 911 calls, it scares people. And I know that fear is not based in any actual data or incident. Nobody has been shot to this point. Now, it could happen because it could happen to any of us, right, in America right now, but it hasn't. But the fear is there. And so I'm being very protective of, especially in this first year, that I don't want to run any risk at all for these folks. And it's just taking a minute. Our average response time for the care team, and this is officers too, right now to these calls, is 5 minutes. And in part, that's because I've got a very small geographic location.
Focused on downtown.
Downtown. But the officers' patrol's already downtown, lots of folks. We are shifting out of the municipal tower. So it's often that we're just going a couple blocks. And what's actually happening is the officers there, sometimes it's what we term a high utilizer. So this is someone who's often in crisis. And then, the officer can say, oh, yeah, we know he's never been violent. You're good. And then they go off. And similarly of interest, I had been saying in the press, it can be 45 minutes. That's actually what it is consistently, that the care team remains in conversation, connecting someone to services or transporting someone. About 38% of the time so far, we've had a transport to someplace. So either back to supportive housing or to some other services, basically. It's all different things. Sometimes somebody has just needed some food or supplies. And so we've assisted with that. But it is 45 minutes, sometimes more than an hour. So if you think about the officer is perhaps spending 5 to 7 minutes and then off, police co-response, again, too often the officer's not needed.
But they're still at the scene.
But they're
that
at
model.
the scene,
Yeah.
right? And they're so, those are CIT trained officers. They're really skilled.
Crisis intervention, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Training, yeah, that's right. And so we don't have the luxury right now of having officers where they're not needed for 45 minutes. So that's the bottom line. It is my hope that, again, we are able to staff up SPD. That's really important, that we're able to be more pragmatic in our response to criminal activity downtown. We need to drive some policy change so that it is less violent, so that I can just send, an alternative response unit quickly. There's not resistance to that. It's certainly not resistance from SPD at all. They
welcome the help.
They need the help and they don't want to go, but they understand what my concern is and why right now we're erring on the side of caution, but we're also anchored in the data. And a lot of analysis has been done the last few years outside of PD, but also inside SPD. Could you send other folks and without any risk? And well, I don't know if you can right now to person down calls. We'll see. And if it looks like, I always say in 90 days, because usually already I've learned things in the first 6 weeks. If it looks like we're fine, police never did stay longer than 30 seconds or 60 seconds. If there's consensus about that, then we'll iterate, right?
But it's understandable that the information you're getting into 911 on that situation and seeing is from often a citizen, right? So you're trusting what's being reported on one end of the phone line.
Yeah, it's that unknown.
Right.
And again, it's very fentanyl specific right now.
Yeah.
I think if it were 10 years ago, I would design this differently. People expected that I would come in and insist that police should not be there. And I was open. Again, I'm very pragmatic. I didn't have a foregone conclusion about any of it. But it just doesn't seem right now with these down calls like that it would be the realistic thing to do given the circumstances. So
there's been the question of who responds and, somebody that's a commissioned law enforcement officer or somebody else, and you've designed a system that we've talked about here of how that works. Then there's a question of what do they respond with?
Yeah.
And you got into a little bit of this of food and other services. Do you have enough resources to respond with? What's the intervention for the folks that your team is connecting with?
Yeah. I mean, John, this is the urgent message. I think I will spend a lot of next year talking about this. We do not have a system designed to actually provide interventions that are meaningful, that will last. We don't. We have some bright spots in this community, but I've had to say, regrettably, I don't have any new resources. I'm operating in the same system everybody else is. We haven't had a 24/7 sobering center for 4 years in this city. Now, that is basic. That surprised me. Again, I only came back last year, and some things I assumed were in place are not in place. I started the job saying frequently, I need places to take people other than jail and the emergency department. And I'm not saying that anymore because I know I don't have those things either. I don't have capacity anywhere. We don't have an appropriate response to fentanyl. I'm of a mind that the way that we responded to other types of addiction, substance use disorder, it's not appropriate for fentanyl. That is what the medical community is saying. And so we need to dwell in that reality. If this intervention will not work, we know that it will not work, we must design something else. It's not useful to pour money, into even the best first response. I often say that I can really manage this first 24 hours beautifully, but then what?
Get there in 5 minutes.
I can get there in 5 minutes. Yeah. That's right. I can connect the person to services. Even in the case of, diversion, you can refer somebody to treatment. Is the treatment there? is it adequate, and is there case management? Because ultimately I care deeply about people. And that's why my mind won't let me just stay in this, very narrow time constraint of the 911 call. My mind is always like, and then what? And then what? I'm in 911. We will get the same call. Sometimes if people are working overtime, the same crisis call,
Same person.
Yeah, that's right. And the same thing's happening. It happens on the crisis side, but it's happening on the criminal side as well. And so I've taken to saying, this is not compassionate. It's not compassionate if I know that this person is going to overdose on the sidewalk. It's statistically probable it's going to happen again tomorrow. I've got the data that says that it will. Is that compassionate design? It is not. And I think the same thing about, we have a tremendous amount of juvenile crime right now. And that is not my space, but it is painful because our kids don't feel safe. Our communities don't feel safe, but we don't have interventions that predictably provide that safety. So we've got to get after that together.
I imagine with your academic and research background, you're already thinking about how you leverage all of this 911 data to influence other systems. It seems that the person down at 3rd and Union, there's a call there, and they may be down again at 3rd and Pike later in the evening. And then 2 days later, some other call that's generated, and whether it's one your team is responding to, or fire or police. But do you see an opportunity to better understand high utilizers, or whatever term you want to use, of the variety of 911 services we have out there, and to then influence how the rest of the systems and services we do have available get to those folks?
Yeah. I think there's tremendous opportunity. I am in love with this work because there's so much potential, and I can see it. One simple thing is, why can't I dispatch whatever the appropriate team is? If we have a unified care team, for example, there's all these different types of responses. If I need a sobering van, why can't I just dispatch that? Why? I was going to say, why the logic model? There's not even really a logic model the way we're doing it.
It's sort of this patchwork of services that have gotten built over the years, right? And
exactly.
funded in different ways, controlled by different entities.
Exactly.
But no conductor.
Yeah, exactly. I do think of it like air traffic control, and actually I am a musician. So I do think, that's fun. Now I'm the maestro.
What do you play?
Yeah, I like it. What's that?
What do you play?
Piano.
Okay.
Yeah, piano. That's for the next podcast. That's a fun topic.
We'll get to that.
Yeah. And so that is that's going to drive a lot of economic efficiency, but it's just so much more humane. If I know what you need, just send what you need, right? It's really hopeful right now because people are so collaborative. And I know that like attracts like, and it seems, I don't know if it starts with this mayor. I don't know how it's come into being, but every day, across the board, people are saying, how can I help? And inside city government too. I started the day today with Human Service Department meeting, but we are all working together. I keep saying it doesn't matter so much where these functions sit in my mind. It matters that we consider ourselves a team, that the work is coordinated. And we do need to think about every dollar as this is the community's dollar. Are we spending it well? If I don't need it, give it back. That's really, really important. I think I'm a huge fan of, again, like dotted line reporting. I understand that there's dimensionality to work, and it's not about an org chart. It's not about, public, private, nonprofit. It's about a community. Who is doing what? Who's doing it well? And I keep saying, we're not going to overserve the community. We're not going to overserve. We need to know each other. We need to know best and highest use of these different teams, and to basically be able to care conference. I mean, that's what's needed. And when the work's going well, that's how it happens. I've been on ride-alongs in different cities. I saw this in Durham. I saw this in Albuquerque, that, one team will be responding in the field and it'll be like, oh, who I think knows this person is. And they know to call that nonprofit provider, or just, text their friend at the fire department and say, do you have any advice here? So in some ways we've become overly complex. And what I'm finding is like, just talk, I show up most of the time and say, can I help? What do you need? And sometimes I can't do it, but I know somebody who can. And I say all the time, there is no room for ego in this work. There is no room for territorialism. I don't want anybody in the space of public service who has those ideas. I feel like it's just not appropriate. We are in the space of crisis. And fundamentally, that is not about me. That is about this person in crisis.
The organizer in me always wants these things to be much more consolidated than they are, but then the realist understands that that'll never probably happen. How do you think of all the patchwork of services and service providers, that some funded by the city, some the county, run by nonprofits, programs of nonprofits, all doing and attempting to do really important and good work, but there's a lot of them. And it's people that are close to this can't even understand it, let alone the public. Is your thought, well, let's map it, understand who's out there, who has resources, who has what, and deploy and coordinate versus trying to like organize it and consolidate it in some different way?
I am a fan of consolidation. More is not more, and you have to prioritize. I would say that you'll be surprised, I think, how much change happens in the next 24 months, because I'm working closely with the county. Michael Redding in particular is a chief crisis. He's a great strategist and design thinker. So I'm in these county mapping meetings. I can tell you in the city is actively happening right now, this public safety sort of crime prevention audit. And folks are in alignment in these city departments that it's not that we love our wide array of interventions. We can't afford it. We don't have the time. We don't have the money, and it's not right. We have to, it's just a basic priority matrix, right? What is both urgent and important? What is actually on fire? Where are people suffering, and what is the root cause? I can tell you one of the things, it is fentanyl. I mean, it is like all roads lead back to this drug right now, and a couple drugs adjacent to it. So
it's driving a fair amount of property crime and violent crime as well, right?
What's fascinating is when I've asked, research and analytics at police, and then also command, and then also patrol, I've said, what do you estimate if you think about the corollary of, addiction or drug distribution, that corollary with property crime and violent crime? Across the board, people are saying it's all of it, Amy. It's virtually 100% of the time. Now, the challenge here is I can't articulate that in the data because we don't drug test everyone, right? So if somebody is arrested in possession, that's a little bit different. Then we can document it. But it's a fun research challenge, and I am working with some folks on this to say, okay, can you triangulate? In 911, we do capture what's observable. He appears to be high, or he appears to be, or we assume, there's some things like that. But I feel like if I can demonstrate that most of the time these things are correlating with this thing, then again, logic demands address that thing. That is your root cause. And so, I think that messaging is important. And I think collectively as a community, again, I just mentioned I am a huge arts fan. I mean, I sort of love everything, I do. I'm curious about everything. I love anything that enriches life. I'm a fan of. I feel like right now we have got to be willing to pause some less critical priorities, because we need basic health and safety right now. Our kids should feel safe. We should focus. This is the smartest city. It was fun to return after being away, to remember like the spirit of inquiry here is really second to none. And, again, I think the Seattle freeze and all of that, I think it's a false narrative. I think we should stop saying that. We're wonderful collaborators here. We're incredibly community-based. I think a lot of people have come in from the outside, so that can create a sense of everybody feeling like they're the new person and they're the outsider. But, that's unnecessary.
I like that spirit of inquiry. We always think of ourselves as, and we are, an innovative place, but before innovation comes some amount of curiosity and inquiry, right?
100%. Yeah, it's all driven by the questions. And I think if we can just stay dispassionate about what the answers might be, really, I like to say in management, just think like a scientist. Don't think in terms of, judgment and assumption and all of that. Think like a scientist. What might this be? And every time I realized that I had it wrong, I got smarter. That's a good thing. You're trying to contribute to an academic conversation, to good policy design, what works. And so, my better days are when I realized that there was a gap in thinking or logic or an incorrect assumption. And, we will change at the speed of that temperament, I think, of that disposition. So, I think these ideas are antithetical to politics. And that's what I've realized. I've never been around politics at all. I've been around policy. I voted, but beyond that, I just haven't been around it. And I suppose that is the pressure. If I want to be elected, then I want to be able to make a wonderful promise. Or if I got elected because I made a wonderful promise, I don't want to stray from the thing that I said. And so I think that the community, the voters, the electorate, ultimately, we do have the power to change that, to say, no, we demand that our leaders be thoughtful and academic and scientific and deliver results that are real, that are meaningful. There are many of these, going back to the audit, we don't have outcomes. You need to be able to show improvements. And again, are we breaking cycles of addiction? Do we have more people who are sheltered? We can look at suicidality. We can look at recidivism, right? So, yeah, we should demand that.
How do you manage expectations? Because you don't have 105 team members like they do in Albuquerque, and you're not hiring 38 more on top of that. You've got a fairly modest budget and a modest team to start in a pilot area focused on downtown. So, I mean, how do you manage expectations of your superiors and the public and anyone else who's sort of watching here?
Yes. I mean, I'm just trying to be universally candid about that it is unfair to put so much pressure to pin all your hopes and dreams on 6 people who are not all in the community at the same time either. This is shift work, that it's a significant step forward, that I can use it. I think of it as a little petri dish to test what is happening other places. Is it happening here? Are these the right call types? A lot of this pilot design I inherited. But it's based on good thinking, right? But as I opened with, this is an emerging field. A lot isn't known. And so we've got to be, I always say rigorous, just every single day we are looking at data, and I'm looking for, again, evidence that I'm getting it wrong, not evidence that I'm getting it right. I already know. I mean, philosophically, there's just a ton of reason to believe this is a good thing. But should it be different call types? Do we actually need more co-response? There are a lot of questions that I have. I'm not too worried about scale because there's so much public appetite there. I'm across all of our districts. I'm in community a lot. I'm in the business community now.
But are you worried about spread?
I'm actually worried about growing too fast. I'm worried about, it's working. Okay, cool. Let's 100 people. Let's go. That's not going to be good. I want to be able to, I am building a new department that I believe will be of equal significance to the community. I believe that this will be a national movement. A couple of my friends, we've talked about, we need 100 third public safety departments in 100 markets. So, this is critically important, in the country. We know that it is. And so, but to do that, you want to lay a solid foundation. What is the culture? What is the philosophical lens? One of my favorite things to think about is the fundamental skepticism of law enforcement, the fundamental skepticism of 911. You're trained to believe something could go terribly wrong. Somebody could have a gun. This could burst into flames. That is a skeptical lens. And this other side, the diversified response options, behavioral health, that is fundamentally optimistic. And that is my background. I fully believe that change is possible. I believe in redemption. I believe in getting the right words in the right order, and then magical things can happen. And so how do you build a department where both can exist? And you have to insist on both existing to be effective. And so I want to make sure that there's a good culture. 911 has been overlooked. I mean, this is industry-wide, right? People have not thought of 911 call takers and dispatchers as first responders in the space of crisis. Tremendous amount of pressure, trauma, secondary trauma. It's relentless work. And yet nationally,
another part of the city where we were short-staffed for quite some time.
Forever.
Right?
Yeah. But they're treated
but we don't think of that really. We think, I want to dial that number and someone's
like customer service.
Going to pick it up.
Yeah. I think we think of it like, a call center. Like if I have a question about my T-Mobile bill, it is not that. So in Washington State, we at least have legislation that says, yes, these are first responders. That's a good thing. But I don't know how much it's acknowledged in our treatment of these folks and the way they're resourced. One of the significant wins for me this year, and perhaps the only thing I really argued about, really pushed, was the new job classification for these care crisis responders. They are first responders. Then I had to really debate
the people working
this.
for you.
Yeah, I wanted them paid, I wanted them acknowledged, and I wanted the protections and provisions that we extend to other first responders, like peer support. And I was successful, and it was really fun to debate it, because it is.
Who was on the other side of the debate?
Well, it's city, the way that we classify and compensate, and it's like, no, it's social work. We only have police and fire.
That was the alternative perspective.
Yeah. And again, these, I'm a very much a team of rivals person, and generally people who argue with me get advanced and promoted. I really like debate. I mean, I want it to be anchored in good thinking, but that was a fun experience for me, because people would say, well, no, that, police and fire absorb risk. Yeah. These folks, it's exactly the same work. And
so you won.
Oh, I won. Yeah. You would have. That could have been a podcast. Amy Smith debates. But it was also like, well, they have an academy, and I said, well, I have an academy. Really the same. Not only is the same types of training required, but I'm also saying you have to have, at this point, it was like master's level credentials in. It's really hard work. So, and the reason it mattered to me so much, again, is because I know that people are watching me. I mean, I'm getting called all the time from all over the place, nationally, asking about the thinking behind this design. And we have got to start thinking about people in crisis response as first responders. We have got to pay social workers and behavioral health specialists. We have to learn how to take care of frontline providers. The churn in the industry, there's so much turnover that folks have to tell their same story of trauma again and again and again and again. I learned that working in foster care. Dependency court causes, sometimes that's the only person that stays with a kid for the 3-year process or whatever it is, into permanency. And so think about it. If somebody already has a trauma past or abandonment issues, and then is interacting with a new person every 6 months, it's just devastating. So again, that's broader than the scope of my work, but I know I'm a voice in that conversation. How
did you find yourself to this role?
I know, right? Through a very strange series of events. Yeah. So I had come back to Seattle when I have grown children. I was working in the Midwest and was happy. But my kids came back to Seattle, spirit of inquiry and all of that, for work. And I've got a kid at Seattle University. They were here from 2010 to 2016, before that, Portland.
So they had a good taste of it.
They did. Yeah. They're Northwesterners. And the older two, one finished grad school, other undergraduate, and they both got good jobs here and came. And so, once the kids started to boomerang back, I was like, wait for me, I want to come. So, and also I finished a terminal degree and was not part-time it was full-time grad school, but I just knew that it was, the end of the first half of my life, and that I was done with my academic stuff. I had loved my career in nonprofit administration. I think I was getting a little bit bored with it also.
Yep.
And
new chapter.
Yeah, it's a new chapter. It's a new chapter. And again, I've been a parent since I was 21, so I really don't know myself outside of these different roles that I've played. And so in the background, I was thinking, I wonder if, I thought I'd probably go be an ethics professor or something, which I kind of am a little bit right now. But so I was open to possibility, but I was not actively looking for anything. My doctoral work focused on driving a learning organization in the context of government, specifically branches of military, homeland security, things like that. So I had been swimming around in data science the last couple of years and just got very interested in the space actually of public safety and provision. And how do you take something that's paramilitary and then say, no, on the front lines, basically be insubordinate, right? We want you to flag trouble, to make recommendations, to challenge. So I don't know if it's, manifesting or law of attraction or what, but when I came back, I had a conversation with Bruce Harrell about a year ago. And Monisha Harrell and Bruce was, suggested that I should do something for his administration. And then Monisha called dibs.
Did they find you, or did you connect with them? How was that
I had talked to someone about the neighborhoods job. Actually, what happened was I was back living downtown, and I was trying to figure out who was doing what for the unsheltered community. So I started asking questions of a couple folks that I knew in government, and somebody said, you should actually look at this. And I laughed. It wasn't this job; it was the neighborhoods job. I just thought I'm never
Department of Neighborhoods.
Yeah, and I thought it was very unlikely that I would work in the public sector. It honestly has never occurred to me ever. But I was really impressed by Mayor Harrell, living here, again, living and working here and moving downtown, starting to see some real progress and movement in a way that I felt like was really compassionate, but also just and realistic. And so I liked that a lot. And, I have a lot of energy and can be pretty relentless and focused. And I wanted it, whatever I have to give, I wanted to use it in a good way. So the story I heard after the fact, after I got hired, I was in the deputy director role, is that apparently there was a cabinet meeting where they were talking about me and my skill set. And it's kind of an interesting background. I do know how to code, and I've got some weird skills that don't usually coexist, a certain set of skills. Yeah. And so apparently Monisha, who is senior deputy mayor, she's over public safety, she calls dibs, which I feel like is a big compliment, right? When somebody calls dibs. And everyone agreed that she had the hardest stuff. And so she should get to come up with, a job for Amy Smith. And so I actually did talk to folks in the mayor's office about a couple different opportunities that they could imagine. And then one day she called me and said, what do you really like to do? And I said, I like complex problems. And I love figuring out how to message potential interventions or solutions in a way that people can understand it and actually drive some progress. And she said, I have a thing for you. And she started to describe this dual dispatch pilot. And I was aware of alternative response. Again, I understood the national movement. So I thought that sounded interesting. But what really intrigued me was she explained how 911 had been pulled out of SPD. And I didn't know. I wasn't here in 2020, 2021. So I really was actually very naive about what happened and how and the genesis. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting to take 150 positions and then just not stand up regular business supports around it, right?
Kind
HR and finance and
bit of a performative, symbolic
I have
move by the council at the time, right?
Yeah, I've gathered, but I'm happy that I didn't
drive the budget of the police department down, at least on paper.
Right, that is what it looks like. But I'm happy I didn't know that. I saw it. I do have, again, an optimism about me, and I was aware that there's Transform 911 research. There's a bunch of recommendations that came out of it. And one is that you want your 911 center, they're called PSAPs is the acronym, so many acronyms this year, that you want it to be objective and independent of other responder teams, which makes sense to me logically, that you want as much objectivity at that point of first contact as possible.
Because they're dealing with fire and medical response as well, and now care.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I'm not sure that was the conversation that was had back in 2020, though, when the decision was made in the council, but we'll look forward, not back.
What I have said about that is that often, we'll do the right thing for the wrong reasons, and I have a number of those examples in my life, that I wound up in the right place, but I wasn't, there wasn't a thoughtful rationale that took me there. And so as Monisha talked about this, and again, it was an appointed position, so there was no interview process or anything. But I just was really preoccupied with the idea that, again, I think some of it's the propensity toward data. And it just seemed so interesting. And I talked to a couple of folks, and I really did like the people that I knew in local government, I really admired. And so then I went through it as a long backgrounding process, because really on the back end, I'm part of SPD. That's still on the back end, CAD.
With a chief title.
Well, I know. Isn't that funny? That's one of my top jokes from the calendar year is how that all happened. But anyhow, it just felt like a thing where I might be able to add some value. I got really scared right before I started, because I thought I like to be very well versed. Again, I'm candid, and I am very authentic about what I know and what I don't know. And I felt like I do not know public safety, And I was talking to my son, my grown son, who's 21. Right before I said, I realize if I make bad decisions, I think people could probably die, and he chuckled and he just goes, Mom, I don't think you're going to make it worse. You have a good brain. I don't think you're going to make it worse. And I've kind of held that. I mean, because it is, I think that's actually the attitude that we have to have, I understand where my areas of expertise lie and where they don't. I think that my outsiderness actually has been very useful it was useful looking back that I didn't understand the political conversation around the organization of my department. It was useful that I didn't know these actors. I really didn't. I didn't know any elected officials other than Bruce and Monisha. And even then, I knew them as they are now. I didn't recall I wasn't engaged in local politics when I lived here before. And so it allowed me to come in and just basically look at term sheets and papers and budgets and data, and then come to conclusions about what might work and what I could recommend. And I didn't, my first press conference, I don't know how you're supposed to do that. I am a teacher. I come from, college classrooms. I lecture a lot and teach a lot. And so if somebody asks me a question, I think it's sincere. And I really want them to understand the answer. I think it's my job to make sure they understand it.
Referencing the press conference with the mayor to announce your new department.
Yeah. I kept saying, does that make sense? Like, Joel, does that make sense?
How thoughtful of you.
Does make sense? Yeah.
Well, all those journalists really capture it.
Oh, yeah. And it really, I told people to email me. They did. I mean, they did. They still do. And so people think that's funny. But after I did the budget hearing, too, answering questions, I was in 2 different sessions. And somebody after said, "You don't know how these go, do you?" And I was like, I've never watched budget hearings, but I've gotten a lot of favorable comments about that, about the candor. And also, I believe it's my job to represent the reality as closely as I can. And, budget, again, that in particular is really interesting. How, if I'm designing new things, how could I say for sure what it costs in 2 years? I don't know because I don't know what types of response we need to grow. And, I want to reserve the right to make recommendations as they're rooted in actual knowledge and data. I don't want to make things up. And so I hope that I'm demonstrating to folks in similar roles that you can do it this way, And again, maybe it all goes sideways, but so far it's been good.
Often when someone comes in from the outside to lead a new system in a new role around an issue where everybody's frustrated and unhappy, they often have sort of outsized power and influence. I mean, they've sort of captured everybody's attention. The elected officials. I'm proposing a theory here of whether you think of kind of this time and space you're in this way, but you have people's attention captured, the community and council members in the mayor's office and the media and others, because people have been so frustrated around public safety in the city, this conversation about needing an alternative response.
Yeah.
You have great expertise and energy from the outside. You haven't been well known here for a long time. Do you think in terms of your power and influence in that realm of being able to say and see and highlight things that others can't, in addition to the nuts and bolts of the team and the program and system you have to run, kind of circling back to the earlier conversation around the deficiency in what you have to intervene with and respond with? Do you think of your role in the purview you have as being pretty unique in what else you can influence? Yeah,
I'm a reluctant spokesperson right now. I would not have sought the position. I really like the deputy role because it's not appointed. And
the role you were
that I was in initially. Yeah. And then this, the department, the director role, the chief role, I would never have solicited. I don't like the vulnerability. I like to be able to commit to people and say, I will do this job for 20 years. And that's just fundamentally not the design of an appointed position. I've also thought of myself historically as most useful behind the scenes. I am a doer. I action things quick. I'm always in the weeds. I'm good at pivoting between like the macro and the minutia. I always have been. It was that way when I was young too. And so I can get a lot done. And I'm pretty comfortable, recognizing that I'm never going to have as much information as I want to make the decision. And again, that's a military principle. If you have half the information you need, you got to act. That's a principle in commerce too, as you know, like you lose the market. Otherwise, you have to manage risk and take meaningful steps forward. I never have wanted to be like the executive director, the CEO role. I never want that because I perceive that you spend so much of your time as a spokesperson, kind of managing up and out. And I liked making stuff and doing things. And so I would not have sought the role. At this point in my life, again, I've already sort of done the things that I wanted to do that would indicate to me that I had a happy life that was meaningful. I love my kids. I've loved learning, and life on the whole has exceeded my expectations. And so now I have a deep desire to contribute. I was raised by altruists. I fully believe that is the purpose of life, is to contribute something meaningful to the human family. And it is reflected back to me that I am uniquely good at this convening point, that I'm good, that the messaging lands, and that the lens through which I look, it doesn't feel interesting or unique to me, but apparently it is. And so if that's best and highest use, if Seattle wants me to mop the floors, I will mop the floors. I love this community. And if I'm just, Seattle's resident ethicist on public safety, then I am very happy to do that. I am aware that people are listening for a minute. And what I am trying to do, John, more than anything else, is to get people to think critically about this. Suspend judgment for a minute. Look at results. Is it working? Can you take this formula and apply it to, myriad situations and get the results you want? So that's one thing. Just be thoughtful. And then the other thing is actually be one Seattle. Be one Seattle. Talk to people. I was exposed to this idea recently of, a quadrant theory, basically, that we all have these different identities and intersectional identities, different political ideologies and religions that, again, inform our philosophy, especially in the space of, intervention, mental health, public safety. But that you can be in your quadrant, but move toward the center, toward the radical center. I've traveled a lot. I've spent, India is one of my favorite places, central India. I mean, I've been in communities where I was alien, so very, very different. And what I observe is that the humans are the humans. At the end of the day, it is still a lot about fear and about love. And so I think those contradictory ideas that were so very unique, that I'm the authority on myself and I can't understand anybody else's experience, really, to have that humility, but also to recognize that we are humans, that we are part of a whole human family, that compassion, again, should be invoked and demanded across the board. And that does not mean an absence of accountability. It doesn't mean an absence of enforcement. On the contrary, that means we need to protect the whole human family, and we need to design systems that will ensure the next generation is better off and not worse. And there are a number of ways that we can see we are taking steps backwards in this country. I have no interest in interpersonal conflict, in attacks, in hate speech, no interest. I want to see a return to civil discourse, to true debate. In part, that's why we're getting so stupid, honestly, because we're not talking to people who have a difference of opinion anymore. Yeah. It was funny. I watched...
No spirit of inquiry.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That can be the name of this podcast, this episode. Yeah. Yeah. I was watching this throwback. It was a Bush-Gore debate, and it was really funny because I remember at the time, again, I'm very middle child and I want everyone to be happy. And I remember at the time feeling like, oh, this is very heated. And now
really
it's like, oh my goodness,
then
like the Jeffersonian conversation. Yeah. It was so lovely.
Then you watched the 4 GOP candidates last week, right?
Anything, anything, any two politicians, it's so unnecessary. And I think I can share at the mayor's cabinet got together for a little holiday thing, and the mayor made a lovely speech, but that's what he stressed to us again, that he talked about how he will not disparage people, that he assumes responsibility, that he often when something goes wrong, he will acknowledge that he has a piece of it, but that he will not point fingers and he will not cast blame. And he can say that because he does walk that walk. And basically, he holds us to that standard. We are not to do that. We are here in service to the community, and we take responsibility to make it better. So, I mean, that I don't know how I think I talk about what I want to talk about. I think somebody asked me a question and then I redirect to the thing I want to say. But yeah, I do feel like I'm glad if people are listening for a minute, just be smart and be kind. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say.
That's all good stuff and very relevant to what you and your team are doing with folks out on the street, right? And trying to see them as fellow humans and wanderers that have been struggling, in our alleys, on our sidewalks for some time, and want the same thing that the rest of us do. And we're trying to intervene and respond and offer some care that gets them on a better path, and recognizing too the rest of the neighborhood that has to function. And
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. That we're all trying to coexist, and that we need to be good neighbors, and everybody should have, an ability to live the life that they're trying to live. And to your earlier point, folks do not, willfully choose this path of certain death and destruction and suffering. They don't. So many things go wrong at so many different points. So, I mean, I hope, John, at a future day, we are doing a podcast and I am way upstream and we are talking about prevention strategies, because right now we're so far downstream.
Yeah, you're catching people.
It is so, oh boy.
Fell in the river and over the falls.
Yeah, and that is a failure of policy. It's absolutely a failure of voter understanding about these issues. And so I hope that, again, nonprofit leaders, public sector leaders, academics, we need to be very, very candid about what's working and never again present, I have a new pilot. It's going to solve everything. Don't do that. Mm-hmm. That's silly. Right? Yeah. I hope that's the soundbite that people
Yeah, I think your approach is I've got a new pilot and I'm going to be wrong a little bit so I can be right.
Yeah. Well, the mayor teased me because in that second press conference, I said, I don't think 6 people can make a meaningful impact. And he was like, oh, Amy, you really don't understand this at all. But again, he didn't correct me. It was more just a reminder that, there are sound bites. And, but again, it's
managing expectations.
That's right. It could make a meaningful impact if we scale it, if we invest. Mm-hmm. But it does seem like in this city, there are certain bright spots I've seen where I'm like, that is brilliant design.
So is that how you're thinking a little bit about this pilot of it's, okay, I've got 6 people, I've got a defined geography.
Yeah.
And this is about learning, testing, being right, being wrong, so that you can scale it and then deliver on people's expectations. I mean, is that how you think of this pilot? Because often in Seattle, we create a pilot, but and then people don't really manage the expectations around it. And they put it out there as if it's going to solve much more than what it's capable of because it's not resourced.
Right.
And there's a lot we haven't, learned yet in how it's going to be ultimately designed. So are you truly thinking much more in a traditional pilot sense of like, we're out there to learn and tweak? And
100%. Yeah. And I actually think the best thing that I have done and probably will do in the next year is to coordinate what's already in existence, to figure out what is primary response to 911 calls, what is secondary response, and probably to scale things that we already have that we need more of. We need more Health One. Yeah. That is a really good design and it works. And I think folks sometimes think that 60 people. No, it's not. I think they've grown to 7 mental health professionals now. That is woefully inadequate. And it's the same thing in police co-response. I believe they have 4 MHPs right now. Yeah. That is completely inadequate for that body of work, which is profound. And so I'm always a fan of, I do this fiscal strategy. I want to understand what I have and how can I optimize what exists? And then once it's like, best and highest use across the board, folks are in the right places, the work is organized, we've stripped away barriers to entry, then you can identify what you need more of. I don't understand fully the capacity of King County Mobile Crisis Team. I know it's illogical to think that somebody could have a fast response time covering King County. Right. You can't get from Denny to Soto in an hour. Sometimes, I can walk it faster. So I think some of these things we just need to be more practical. Is a better design to say, and I don't know the answer if this is actually a question, to say, okay, no, Seattle needs to do its own mobile crisis, really. We need to do that, primary and secondary, so that we can release more resources to the greater metropolitan area, rather than being a drain on. We have more density here and a lot of crisis. I don't know. But I think that will be the contribution, is to start to think in terms of the continuum of response. I've got community service officers and SPD. I feel like we should be able to dispatch them. They were dispatched, I've heard, in the 70s. Why couldn't we do that? And so it could be that I actually do have in existence in the city right now 100 people. I mean, think unified care team, think about victim support, think about all
these different programs
resources
that we've stood up over the years that are somewhat disconnected.
Yeah. So I feel like just figuring out, again, start with 911. When you look at the bell curve, like what are most of the calls that are not police and fire? And then think in terms of resources, and we just need to do some matching, right? And what do we need more of? Maybe we need far more of one team than the other. I love the idea of centralizing the mental health sort of crisis response function in my department. I feel like in a perfect design, if you had 100 social worker type people who could do crisis response, ideally they would flow to the work. It would be cool if we had folks who were upskilled to be able to go over and join police and co-response if that's what was needed. Again, if I had tons of priority 2 down calls, which I do currently, wouldn't that be better to be able to just send them over to have CIT trained officers? And then you've got, for a minute, that crisis response team is 5 times as big as it was. Now, we've never set up that way. We just haven't. But why couldn't you? Why couldn't you?
So you may have a symphony, it's just not assembled.
Right, that's right.
Yeah, it's just scattered around.
Yeah, I'm running a music
halls.
school. I got classrooms with instruments and players. Yeah.
So, Amy, we have a couple of standard questions on the podcast here. The first is, what was your first job that you took, like a paycheck for?
Like a real paycheck. I had a lot of jobs. I was like a little worker girl.
Like cash under the table jobs.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I was like a little farmer, basically. A lot of childcare, a lot of housekeeping. Basically, I'm attracted to chaos. Like if there is disorder, if there are weeds in that garden, I can't help myself. And so, yeah, I did a lot of that. But the first time I had a paycheck, I was an employee, was at a department store that was kind of like Macy's in Oregon. It was called the Emporium. And my grandmother worked there. She had retired and then went to work. And I loved it. I was 15. I loved that I worked with my grandmother. And I got to know her. She actually just passed away a couple months ago. I got to know her in a different way. But again, I love organizing things. I really do. I always have. In fact, my mom said in kindergarten, and I have seen this, that the comment on my little report card was, Amy loves to organize the other children. my mom was
not just things, but people.
Yeah. My mom thought I was
probably neat and tidy
obnoxious.
at home?
I am.
Is your vehicle and your place of residence
some
very
have
neat?
Suggested it could be a disorder of some sort.
I have that one.
Oh, do you have that?
Oh, I do,
yeah. No, there's a lot of.
It's not a disorder. It's just the way I am.
Yeah, I just why the chaos? Just organize it. Yeah. So that was my first job.
What a neat experience to work alongside your grandma for your first kind of real paid gig.
Yeah, I am, like many people, a believer that if you haven't worked in food service or retail, you probably can't be a good community member. It just teaches
you're not a good customer.
Yeah, that's right. I am still very, very, very considerate. Yes, as a consumer.
Yeah. Our second and final question: what's your perfect Saturday in Seattle? If you can design it from morning till
in Seattle. I want to say like alphabetizing spices now because I really do like to do things. No, my perfect. So in Seattle, again, I am an arts person. So I actually love to be alone. I have a lot of people I love, but I like time to be contemplative. I love Sam. I love the sculpture garden. I love. I have different running routes. And I like to sit under a tree and read a book, or Seattle Public. So anything that's like art and poetry and nature, that's sort of the trifecta. If there's a fourth thing, it's the Container Store. So,
the Container Store.
Yeah.
Very good.
I spent a birthday in the Container Store, and it was so joyful. And my mom was like, "That is a cry for help." It was good.
Did the intervention come, or did they just let you organize and store and put things in containers?
I know. Again, if I am not good in public safety, I can Container Store. I'm going to come try to be a manager.
Well, thanks, Amy, for making time for this, for visiting with our board last week. I know you were meeting with our team earlier to talk about our ambassador teams on the street and how we can coordinate with your folks.
I'm really excited about that. I want to come shadow.
You're always
be
welcome.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be great.
And thanks for what you're doing in our city.
Yeah.
And we're rooting for you and here to support you and be a partner.
Yeah.
So
Thank you, John. I appreciate
you
it.
making the time for the podcast.
Yeah. Anytime.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Amy Smith, a dynamic, no-nonsense leader, just the type of person we need leading this new effort. I really appreciate her perspective, how frank she is, and her commitment to a pretty challenging task here, and with a lot of expectations, right, that the public and other folks have for improving safety in Seattle and having an alternative response here where appropriate. So we thank Amy for joining us and for her public service with the City of Seattle. I want to close out with a recommendation of something you just got to check out in downtown Seattle, something not to be missed. This could be something new or recently reopened or something to come. And in this case, it's the new location of Mainstay Provisions, which is a cafe and market started by husband and wife team, Tom and Ashley, two locals that have a location up in Ballard that's been hugely successful and popular. They offer high quality food and market items at great prices in a terrific space, and have opened a new spot at the corner of 7th and Bell in one of Amazon's great buildings in downtown in the Denny Regrade neighborhood, a great addition to that part of town. Go check out Mainstay Provisions. They're open 7 days a week. Great food and beverage offerings. They describe it as a modern take on an East Coast bodega. Corner store staffed with talented chefs and a barista, as well as a curated wine and specialty good selection. Right up my alley. Congratulations to them for opening their second location downtown. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on this episode of Seattle City Makers, presented by the Downtown Seattle Association with support from James Cito and production by Spark Creative.